Hey, what's happening? Welcome to this week's episode of the Stick Bow Chronicles, brought to you by Black Widow Bows. I'm going to keep this short because it is a long episode, and I had a blast doing it. John Barklow from Sitka, he mentions several times in the podcast that he apologizes, he gets long-winded, gets on a rail, and just takes off. But really, the fault lies with me because I pretty much geeked out on this episode. So talk about a fascinating guy. John Barklow, his background is so well suited for his job. Yeah, he's a fascinating guy. I had a blast talking to him. If this episode is not out before the 29th, then this will be a reminder to head on over to www.stickbowchronicles.com and get a $5 ticket to support Compton's traditional bow hunters. It is a live event with Monty Browning and Brian Burkhart. The door prizes alone are worth the $5. Trophy line tree saddle, Safari Tough bow case, Selway Archery slide-on bear quiver, and the footed shaft put up two $50 gift certificates. So you don't need to be virtually present to win. Buy the $5 as a raffle ticket. It's certainly worth it, and supporting Compton's is certainly worth it. So without any more lip flapping, I'm going to say, hey, big thanks to the Footed Shaft, Selway Archery, Kifaru International, and of course Black Widow Bows. I'll zip it. John Barklow. Enjoy. So, John, we've talked a handful of times on the phone, and I've listened to some other podcasts you've been on, and I got to say that it seems like you genuinely love what you do.
That's a fair statement. I've been doing it a very long time as well. Yeah, no, that's fair. I do.
Yeah, and that's pretty fortunate to be into something that you're so passionate about. I got to be honest with you. I'm caught somewhere. I think we're close to the same age. I feel like I'm caught someplace between old school and cutting edge, and that's pretty much all aspects of my outdoor life. And in all honesty, when you and I first talked, I said, man, I was the guy that when Sitka came out with the statement turning clothing into gear, I was like, pshaw, that's a bunch of crap. So I've gotten good at eating crow over the years.
Yeah.
uh,
Well, it's funny. We're doing this podcast pretty early in the morning, and some in the kitchen at 5:30 making coffee, and you hit me up and you're like, hey, you ready to do this? I'm like, yep. And I'm thinking in my head, like the thought crossed my mind. I'm like, do I really want to do this right now? And just as quick as that thought came through my head, the next thought was, hell yeah, I love this stuff. So to answer your first question, it's kind of what I do. And I've been fortunate enough to, take my hobby, so to speak, my passion, and be able to make money with it in a professional career. I've done that my whole life. I don't know how. I just kind of bumbled into it. But it's worked out. So, and it's interesting. I think the first time you and I talked, I might have said this, but I think it's worth repeating because we are right about the same age. I'm 51, and I shoot a compound bow. I have since I was 14 or 15 years old, and I do own some recurve bows, and I love shooting them. But my point to that is not the equipment, but I like to say I'm a modern day bow hunter with old school ethics. And that's not just ethics, but it's like, I love the past. I love the history. I love where we've come from. And no matter the weapon I have in my head or in my hand, it doesn't change what I have in my head, and the way I think about myself. And so there's a lot of benefit to it, if people are interested on the clothing side, not the weapon. I don't even want to go there. But there's a lot of benefit to it, like we've talked. And but you're right. I mean, there is like this internal struggle almost sometimes. I'm like, gosh, do I really need this stuff? Because I mean, I'm not good enough. I can go run around in a loincloth, but I can run around with a lot less than, it is, even though I work for a technical clothing company, I can get away with a lot, but that's based on a couple decades of experience. And most people aren't able to do that. So there's a huge benefit to at least thinking about trying some of these new things.
Yeah, and before we get rolling, would you mind, just touching on how you got where you are? What you used to do, your former life, because I find it pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so it's fairly unique. So I was in the military for 26 years. But that's not the unique part. But I had a interesting career, and I started out as basically a hard hat diver in the Navy, which slowly got me over time teaching for the SEAL teams in the Navy, and then through just a lot of circumstances and I don't know, I guess good life choices. Um, I ended up in Alaska after not soon after 9/11 happened. I was on the West Coast at one of the SEAL teams, and we realized very quickly that we needed the community needed to put together a group of people that had experience in the mountains to get guys trained up to go to Afghanistan very quickly. And I just happened to have the right skill set that I was developing on my own time. I was maybe thinking about getting out of the Navy, and I was becoming a mountain, training to become a mountain guide. And I was working with platoons, already teaching them climbing and mountaineering, etc. Anyways, I find myself up in Alaska training guys to go to Afghanistan. And that's what I did for, I forget anymore, somewhere between 12 and 14 years. I did this. And part of that in the beginning was developing the clothing and equipment that was unfortunately antiquated at the time, to get the guys to be able to go and fight in the Hindu Kush in these different mountains. So that kind of started my product development life. And so I was able to marry, this is the interesting part, I was able to marry this developing product with teaching people how to use it, and seeing how, what I thought in my head was a good idea actually wasn't a good idea in reality. And, how my experience level, say I was, had much more experience than, say, the average platoon guy, that they weren't able to necessarily take what I was teaching and use it right away. So we modified our teaching techniques, we modified the equipment, and we really brought the military from 20 years behind, I would say, the outdoor community, to leading the charge. We were literally working with companies, like textile companies, which doesn't sound cool, but it was cool in the sense that we were literally bringing stuff to market and putting it in clothes for our special operations guys that the world had never seen at the time. So really unique, diverse background. I feel very blessed to have done that. The whole time I'm in Alaska, I'm hunting where I can, just kind of living, again, my childhood dreams in that regard. I'm in the military, I'm living some more childhood dreams. Like I said, I don't know how these things work out. And then I decide I'm ready to retire. I have really no idea what I want to do, except, I'll go work in the hunting industry. I'd love to work for Sitka. And sure enough, they just happened to be posting the first job for what's called the big game product manager, which is what I currently do, which is I work with the designers and the developers and the field testers, and we come up with all the cool stuff that Sitka puts out for big game hunting. And I've been doing that for 5.5 years now.
Yeah, man, I get you did walk right in, walk in one door and out the other. And
I literally did. Yep.
yeah, I didn't realize that was one of my questions. Was Sitka the first uh, clothing manufacturer that you had worked for? But yeah, that's cool.
Well, I worked for a small company for 6 months. Guy I knew gave me I'll I'll give him all the credit in the world, but Rick gave me my first break in the sense that, here's this, idiot getting out of the military and wants to be, a regular person. And he said, well, I've got a job where it was kind of a half step, but I worked for a company called Beyond Clothing out of Seattle. And what we did is I built, again, with the guys, some really specialized uniforms for some different, we'll call it maritime, which is, like ocean going kind of things. I did that for 6 months. And that's when I realized I kind of wanted to still do this, but I'd been talking to Sitka the whole time because I really wanted to work in the hunting industry. I love the military. I owe them a lot, but at a certain point, like, it's like, it's like a fat kid at the buffet table. Like eventually you've had your fill. And I'd had my fill and I was just like, not that I disliked it, but I'm like, I just need to distance myself from this for a little while. And Rick was very gracious to let me do some projects for him. And then this sick opportunity came along and I had to take it.
So you, in your position now, you get to pretty much hands-on. You come up with an idea, a design, and move it forward. Is that what your position is?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. But they're not all my ideas. To use some crude language, I'll just say that I look at my job as a giant shit filter and a sewage pipe. And so what I mean by that is, everybody's got ideas. I mean, I've got ideas, the people I work with, our ambassadors, field staff, like you name it, right? Everybody's got ideas. And so, the first part of my job is to sit there and filter out all these ideas and see which ones are the best, which ones, we think we can actually make commercially viable. So that we can make it on a scale so we can sell it, right? Because some ideas, which still get through, but some ideas are just crazy ideas that nobody knows if we can even do, but they're at least worth trying. And maybe it never ends up anywhere, but maybe we work on it for 5 years and it becomes the next coolest thing. So I'm kind of like that gatekeeper. And then, again, I work with the team and, luckily or unluckily, depending, like we just launched this thing called Kelvin Light Down. Like, I actually didn't know that I was going to be more of the face of this product launch. I really didn't know that, even though I sat through some of the interviews. But I'm lucky enough, or the other guys in my position are lucky enough to kind of be the face of these product launches, even though there's a whole team behind us that's cranking every day to get it done.
So explain to me what the ambassadors are. Those sportsmen in the field and that have different specialties, like elk hunting or Arctic type hunting, and they're guys that you interact, guys or gals that you interact with and get ideas from, and they kind of test your products. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably one that's glossed over most of the time. So, yeah, to answer your first broad question, ambassadors are people. There's a lot of them that are guides or outfitters. So this is their profession, and they're they could be anywhere in the country. And so we know that those guys are spending 200 plus days in the field, and they can give you some really good feedback, durability testing, etc. They've also got some social presence, a lot of them, so that what they're doing, they're getting their name out there and their business out there, but also our products are being shown in the field, which we want. And then there's so then there's like a step deeper than that, and not to demean any ambassador by any means, because some of them are field testers, but the next level down are field testers. And field testers, everybody asks, how do I become a Sitka field tester? And it's a tough question. If I want to be a smart ass, I'll just say, well, first of all, I have to know you. And second of all, I have to trust your opinion. And I mean it. I'm not being a smart ass, but it comes off that way. And what those guys are guys and gals that most people never know, you'll never hear about. They don't really want to be on social media. That's not why they're doing it. And through whatever life circumstance, they're able to spend a lot of time in the field testing. And I call it testing because there's a difference between, hey, put this on and wear it and tell me what you think. And, hey, I need this tested, and here's the kind of parameters I need it tested to. Is it durability testing? Is it breathability? There's lots of different things that we can get into. I've got one guy in Colorado, and I gave him a set of rain gear 2 years ago. And I said, hey, I need this tested. I want to see what the breathability is. A lot of times you're not testing like how it fits at the time. You just like, is it breathable? Does it keep rain off you, et cetera? And then durability. So at Sitka, we pride ourselves on making our products durable so they last. So I wanted to know what durability was because it was pretty thin rain gear. And so, this was in the spring. He comes back late summer with this, report. And he's like, I've got 750 hours on this rain gear. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I got 750 hours in this rain gear. I'm like, okay, first of all, that's a lot of hours, period. I said, second of all, you wore rain gear 750 hours. He's like, well, yeah, I was doing all this mountain biking above tree line and blah, blah, blah. Those guys are invaluable to me in what I do because I can't spend 750 hours in the field anymore. And so, they do a great job. And so that they're even farther behind the scenes that people, and they don't want to be heard about. It's not like I haven't tried to promote them. They just don't want the limelight. They just do what they do. I got a guy in Bozeman. I mean, I can give that guy a pair of pants and in a week he'll bring me back enough hours that most people, it would take him a month to get it on. So really quick turnaround. You and I talked about durable pants. It's like, that's how I can stand there with a lot of confidence and say, yep, this will be durable enough. Trust me.
Yeah, that brings up a good point for somebody like me. I mean, we got this platform. People listen in. You don't want to be the guy that's just pounds your fist and, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. This is the greatest thing ever. Aaron and I and another buddy, we joke around a lot, like, hey, hey, I just got this package. I haven't opened it yet, but I'm pretty sure that these are the best boots I've ever owned.
Uh-huh.
When you hear that kind of crap. So, those pants that I wore in this last hunt, uh, I'm floored by how they perform. I mentioned that how many of those big yellow pines I had to skinny across, day in day, like 3 or 4 a day. And you wouldn't want to run your hand up and down that bark. And I got my legs wrapped around these things skinny. And it's the only pair of pants that I have, right? I'm backpacking. That's all I got. And I'm floored by, they didn't even pile, you know what I mean? Like how the
Mm-hmm.
fabric piles.
Yeah.
So then to go on and to go on and on social media or, on the podcast and say, these pants are unbelievable. You want to have some kind of credibility. So you don't want to be the guy, pounding his fist on the table all the time saying, this is the best.
Yeah. It's tough to say that, certain clothes fit people certain ways. Certain people like certain camouflage patterns, they have some affiliation through friendships or regionality or whatever, but I don't know if anybody makes anything more durable than us as a general statement, because I know what we put it through, and I'm not sure you could put it through a whole lot more. And I'm not even talking about the lab testing that we do. And the thing is, that hunt you went on, that is the perfect example of, why we try to make our things. So, I mean, yeah, you can destroy them, but I want to try to make them as indestructible as possible. Because when you're out there, because you sent me that video, I'm like, yeah, if you pitch off that, Rob, you're dead. Like, there's just no, you're dead. So you're hanging on, I'm sure, pretty good with those legs of yours on those trees. And you don't want to get to the other side and find that you've torn the inner legs out of your pants and you're 16 miles back in the wilderness. Like, That's not good for anybody.
I wouldn't, you know what? It wouldn't have surprised me. And I wouldn't have looked down on the product and said, oh, these things are junk. I would have expected it. But like I said, and it would have taken tenacious tape in the crotch for, for another 4 or 5 days would not have been good.
Yeah. Well,
uh,
the thing is, if that did happen, so first of all, if that did happen and you came back and called me or customer service, there's a good chance that we would either repair it or replace it. Like that's the warranty. I mean, because they shouldn't have worn out that quick. Now, 10 years from now, if we talk about this and you shimmy across the same tree and rip the crotch out, okay, well, you know, maybe we'll give you a discount on the next pair, but we do stand behind our warranty, you know. And the second one is, like, I've got guys in the field, like some of these guides, and they're spending 200 plus days a year in the field. And, you know, we're talking Northwest Territories, you know, Kodiak, Alaska, places like that. And they're getting 2 years worth of use out of one pair of pants.
Oof.
So you're talking over 400 days. Most of us, you know, accumulatively don't spend that many days in the field before we either outgrow the pants or we just get tired of them and want to buy a new pair. So, you know, I'm pretty confident. And that's the one thing I tell people about Sitka, and I'm not just trying to promote Sitka, but the one thing I would say is, with this technical clothing, Sitka specifically, I just say it's an investment because it's going to last a while. Like, our stuff is, I can't speak for anybody else's, but our stuff's going to last a while. And for some reason, if there is an issue, like, we'll take care of it for you. So it's kind of like you're spending, like, relax, because you're spending good money, and it should be there for you. I mean, here's the deal. I was using this stuff before I ever got to the company. So, I mean, I was already, whatever, drinking the Kool-Aid, however you want to say it. But at the end of the day, I still am an end user of my product. I'm probably one of the, if not the biggest, harshest critic of everything we do. One, because I want to protect the brand, but I want to protect my own image, you know.
Sure.
And I don't want to have my pants rip out 16 miles in on a flipping spring bear hunt, right?
So, if for anybody listening, those are the mountain pants. And just to put it in context, I probably bought, you know, in the beginning, I said how I was, you know, a critic of this idea of technical clothing. So, my evolution to where I am today, I think, I don't remember what my first, you know, quote unquote technical pants were, but I've used Kuyu
Yep.
and with mixed results. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, there were some aspects of it that I really liked. But then I went to First Light, and that didn't last too long. Um, and this is just my honest opinions. I mean, I couldn't buy this. I couldn't buy two of the same articles of clothing and have them fit the same. Everything was like, everything was like sewn by a different person with a different idea.
Yeah.
And then there were certainly some durability issues there. So that's what brings me to Sitka. And now, speaking like this recent bear hunt I went on, those mountain pants, for me, they were the right choice for this hunt. You know, durability and I don't not well, durability and just the right time of year, right? Because
Yep.
we had some 70-degree days, and we got snowed on. So, what kind of a, you know, if I had called you up and said, "Hey, John, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back into the Frank Church for 7 days, 6, 7 days, and I'm going to see 40 to 50-degree temperature swings." What kind of a clothing system would you have recommended to me?
Yeah. So we'll get to the pants. As far as the clothing system, any clothing system that we or anybody else makes, it starts with, I mean, it sounds obvious, but I'll get into more of it. But it starts with the base layers, right? So it starts with whatever clothing is going to be directly next to your skin. So think of base layers as the foundation of your house. If you build it on a shitty foundation, everything else is going to be shitty. It just is. And so I'm a huge proponent of synthetic base layers. Now that's a personal preference. And, and I have my reasons why. And a lot of it is because I've lived and worked in such wet, humid environments. But wool is, I don't want to say just as good, but wool is another great option as a base layer. But so either synthetic or wool, you need to start there. It should be thin, and it should be it not like compression fit, because most of us don't look good in that kind of stuff. But it should fit close enough to your body. And the whole intent, the only thing the base layer is really intended to do, it's not intended to keep you warm. It's intended to regulate your temperature. And the way it regulates your temperature is by taking the moisture on your skin and moving it away, right? So your skin, your body stays dry. And when you're dry, you're able to better, it's called thermoregulate, but your body's able to regulate its temperature better. And so where this becomes really important is if you have other clothing layers on top of that base layer, like that's when this whole, system thing, I'm doing air quotes, but this whole system thing starts, right? So base layers are critical, synthetic or wool. If you put cotton into this layer, you're screwing the whole thing up. And that's really the only quote rule that I have, is that with any of these new systems, just don't wear cotton. And the reason is cotton holds moisture, which is going to, for a lot of reasons, not allow you to thermoregulate, unless you're in a hot Arizona desert in the summer chasing antelope. You can run around in a cotton shirt. You're probably fine there, but it's got a very limited use window. And I would argue synthetics do as good, if not a better job anyways. So anyways, you start there, and then you get to what I call the soft shell layer. So that's kind of what the pants you're talking about. So, these soft shell layers that's what's, generally you're going to want in a camel pattern or some kind of subdued color, because that's what's going to be, your exterior facing garments for the most part. Like rarely are you going to run around in your long underwear. So, this needs to be able to manage moisture, also be durable. It needs to fit really well. You want it to have the right features. So, hand pockets, thigh pockets, whatever the case may be. In the case of the mountain pants, we have removable knee pads. And then for the upper body, I'm actually a huge proponent of soft shell jackets with some wind stopper in it, or some type of wind stopper vest. And I think that, so for instance, the mountain pants have something called the mountain jacket. It's the perfect complement, and it's probably one of the pieces I have in my pack. No matter the season, I always have that in my pack. And so it's a really thin windstopper jacket. And why I find windstopper so critical is because as your body is moving this moisture, right, as you're hiking up a mountain, you're getting sweaty. A lot of times in the mountains, it's windy. Like rarely do you get those just bluebird days where there's no wind and everything's just like perfect, and big elk are standing in front of you with blinders on waiting for you to shoot them. Doesn't happen to me very often anyways. So understanding it's probably going to be windy, understanding my base layer is going to be damp as it's moving sweat. You lose heat really quick with something called convective heat loss, which is wind blowing across your body that's wet. It strips heat away very quickly. And then you also have something called evaporative heat loss, where just your body radiating heat through that moisture, again, strips heat away from your body very quickly. And so this is how people get to a top of a mountain and they're very chilled and they can't warm back up. So I'm a huge proponent. So the hunt you went on, and I'm long-winded, Rob, if you haven't figured this out.
Oh,
so
you're
I
good,
apologize.
man. No, you're good.
But the hunt you went on, and the same hunt, not the same hunt, but so the hunt you went on in May, and the hunt I went on last October with Frank and Snyder for mule deer in Alberta, I wore the same system, and I wore the mountain pants. Now I wore a couple other things, but I wore the mountain pants and the mountain jacket over top of synthetic base layers. For those time frames where it's, I'll call it dynamic weather or schizophrenic weather, where it's all over the board. You never know day to day, hour to hour, what it's going to do. It could snow, it could be raining, it could sunshine again and back to snow. I think we make 5 awesome pants in the big game line. And I would say if I had to pick one, and it's the one I wore even before I ever got to Sitka, it'd be the mountain pant. I think it's the most versatile technical pant we make. So it's got, as we were talking, all the bells and whistles, right? It's got hand pockets and cargo pockets and zippers here, and it's got removable knee pads, which a lot of people haven't experienced that, and it's, this 4-way stretch, and it fits great, and it breathes pretty good, but it also blocks some wind. I just think it's a great, all around type of pant, and it's probably the most popular pant in the Sitka big game line right now. So you chose well.
So when you mentioned that you're using, you are a proponent of synthetics. One of the things about merino wool that I find amazing is its ability to hold down, odor after day after day after day. Do you, how do you mitigate that with synthetics?
Yep. So merino wool is an incredible product, and it's natural, right? I mean, comes off the sheep, and it's got it's called a natural antimicrobial property to it. So wool is, let's put it this way, everything that we try to do in the synthetic realm is trying to mimic what wool has already done. And it's trying to synthetics are basically trying to take the best properties of wool and then trying to tweak on some of the downsides of wool, which I'll get into. But there's nothing better to regulate odor than wool. There just isn't, right? I mean, Mother Nature did a great job of it. How we try to balance that on the synthetic side. So if you don't treat a synthetic, most of it's polyester. If you don't treat a synthetic with something, it's going to stink really bad. Like, it's going to stink so bad, the wearer's not going to like it. And especially if you got your buddy jammed in your tent, like, you're going to both hate each other pretty quick. So over the years, there's been a bunch of different ways to try to mitigate that. What we use at Sitka is something called Polygene. So it's a environmentally safe, recyclable, naturally occurring silver salt. And it's treated on the fabric. It can be treated anywhere in the production process. So it can be treated on the finished garment, on the textile before it's made into a garment, anywhere within the process. Again, we were one of the first ones to bring it out. They're from somewhere in Europe. I can't remember exactly. And now a bunch of the bigger outdoor brands have kind of jumped on board with Polygene. Polygene's great. It's not going to be as good as wool. And depending on the person wearing it, they're going to have a different experience. And I've talked to the engineers at Polygene trying to figure it out. And, English isn't their first language, and they understand what I'm saying, but maybe I don't understand what they're saying. But basically, depending on the person's chemical makeup, so, the pH of their body, how much they sweat, how little they sweat, etc. So when we first got Polygene in our base layers, I took a shirt that we had, and I purposely, I worked out in it for 2 weeks. Actually, it was 10 days straight. And every time I was done with the workout, I would take the shirt off and I would ball it up and I'd just throw it in the corner of my garage because my wife wouldn't let me do that in the house. And I just wanted to see how many days I could just try to crush this shirt. And what was interesting was when I took the shirt off at the end of the workout, it was a little sweaty, etc. And it had some odor, some body odor to it. And the next day when I went and grabbed the same shirt, the body odor was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was gone. You know, could I smell that I wore it the day before? Yeah, but it wasn't offensive. And so talking to these engineers, you know, they said what happens is that, and this is the analogy I use. Remember, you and I definitely remember the video game Pac-Man. So if Polygene's the little face that eats all the little dots, and the dots are your odor, the Pac-Man run around and eat the odor as you're wearing the garment. But if you sweat too much, or whatever your pH is in your sweat, you can kind of overwhelm the Pac-Man. Again, they can only eat so much so fast. They can't go any quicker. But when you take the garment off, or you stop moving, and so you're not sweating, the Pac-Man have the ability to catch up and go around and clean everything up. And so when I came back the next day, you know, the treatment had done what it needed to do, and then I was able to put it back on. Most people have that experience. Some people don't. Again, like I said, I'm really long-winded. If you put on wool, you're going to take care of the body odor issue immediately, because wool naturally does it. The thing I don't like about wool in some situations is that wool does not dry as quick as synthetic. And there's pros and cons to each, and I could probably write a small book on just this, and I won't bore you to death, but wool doesn't give up its moisture quite as quick as a synthetic. That can be good, because it's called warm when wet. You always hear people say warm when wet, and I always counter and say, yeah, but I'm still wet. And depending on the environment you're in, that can set you up for some, not for some long-term issues, but definitely being chilled longer than you need to be. Wool also, interestingly enough, and I think it's through the lanolin and whatever chemical process, but it's able to generate a little bit of heat, believe it or not. I've just chosen, because I worked around the water so much and in humid environments, I would much rather wear synthetic and be dry very quickly. The problem with that is, depending on the environment you're in, some people actually say that they feel that they're getting colder or they're cooling down. And I talked about that evaporative cooling, where your body heat is going through that wet garment and pulling heat away from your body. You can actually feel that sometimes because the synthetic is working so well. But I would rather be chilled for just a couple minutes. You know, let's just say 15 minutes on average, if I have a puffy jacket on, that this cooling effect goes on while I dry out. Or I can be damp and sweaty for, say, you know, an hour wearing wool. So it's really personal preference. When I'm hunting whitetails, I'm wearing wool. When I'm in the mountains for X number of days, I'm wearing synthetic. That's just kind of my personal choice and where I default to.
Well, first off, that was probably the greatest 80s analogy you could have ever used. Is the background.
I got to keep it real for us, Rob.
For us old guys. You know, everybody throws out the term breathability, right? Breathability. Just touch on, what is breathability? I mean, it seems obvious, but from a technical aspect, how do you measure breathability?
Well, at least you're not asking the hard questions that just require a 10-minute answer. No, this is a great question. So breathability, there's actually ways in the lab to measure breathability. So as an example, you see all kinds of numbers thrown out for different kinds of rain gear. You know, and we use Gore-Tex at Sitka, which, you know, I've got a long storied 30-year history with using Gore-Tex products, and not just rain gear, but also dry suits. You know, I've trusted my life to Gore-Tex, and I've seen how they make it and the testing, and I don't think anybody makes anything better. But everybody can measure it a little differently. And the reality is that, you know, if you wanted to, you know, lab results are lab results. And, you know, the day I can walk into the lab and kill 180-inch mule deer with my bow, is the day I'll probably quit hunting. My point is, we don't hunt in the lab, right? So you have to go out into the field, and this is where the clothing system comes into play. And I'm not a scientist, but I do pretend to be one on podcasts. So let me tell you one more thing that will help with the breathability and moisture management, is really how I frame it up. Conversation. And so there's something called a temperature gradient. So again, going back to the foundational base layers, we put this on our body. It's a foundation of the house. All it really needs to do is regulate the moisture, right? And so as we're, moving and generating heat, this heat needs to go somewhere. So it radiates out from our body. We've got a base layer on. That base layer is absorbing sweat. That heat moves through that moisture, and we talk about that evaporative cooling. So that is breathability. The way we're able to make that base layer, as thin as we can, and not make it super tight, and the different materials all kind of affect this. How much moisture, how much of that heat and moisture can get through. This is breathability. So now you start to stack a bunch of clothing layers over top of that. That's where things become complicated. And this is where technical clothing systems shine. So if you can imagine, you have 3 layers of clothing. So I've got a base layer. I've got this, let's just say, a heavyweight fleece top. And then I've got my windstopper mountain jacket. So I've got 3 layers. And next to my body, generally we'll just call it 98.6. And if I'm sweating, it's 100% humid environment. Well, if I'm hunting in an environment that's less than 98.6, so let's say it's 50 degrees outside, and the relative humidity is, let's just say 20%. So a much more arid environment. Just by physics, that moisture is gonna be moving from your hot, humid body through those layers to the cooler, more arid environment outside. And what we want to do is we want to make that journey as easy as possible, right? So every time it hits a layer, it loses a little energy, this temperature gradient, as it fights its way through that layer. And so by the time it gets to the next layer, it's been weakened. And the reason this is important is because every layer that you put on top has to be designed, engineered to be super efficient at moving moisture, because it's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker as it goes through all these different layers. That is really what, in a kind of a high level nutshell, what breathability is. I call it moisture management, because if your layering system doesn't, quote, breathe, you're like, well, this thing sucks. I'm damp. This thing's not breathing well. Okay, yeah, it's the moisture. You're managing from the time we leave the trailhead till the time we get back. All we're trying to do is manage moisture. And that moisture is generated from us with sweat, or you falling in or not falling in a creek, or trying to protect yourself from rain or snow. We're managing moisture. We're managing moisture by ventilating our tents, so it's not super damp inside and raining on us when we wake up. Like, it's all about managing moisture. So I'm giving you long answers, but that's what breathability is. And that's what these technical clothing systems, why they're so important. And so we engineer the different textiles specifically for the layer. So a mid-layer textile is not just a thicker version of a lightweight base layer textile, because it won't work very efficiently. You have to engineer it to be super efficient, increase the surface area, understanding that moisture is going to be moving through with not as much punch the farther away from your body. And so we want it to be as efficient as possible. If you want to stop recording this podcast, Rob, and just go, this guy's an idiot, there's no way anybody's going to care about this. Like, you can start right now. And you shouldn't even cut that out. But you're asking, so I'm going to try to answer the best of my ability.
No, this is good conversation, because I look at a guy like me who, number one, you working class guy. We're not talking about Walmart camo here, right? Let's face it, Sitka gear is expensive, as is all, high-end technical clothing. Yep. So as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, number one, I generally have I have a base layer on, whatever it is, I have a base layer on, and then I have usually the same thing in my pack. So I probably don't give it time to do what it's supposed to do, because when I get to the ridge, where I get to where I want to be, I rip the wet one off, put a dry one on, and then, hang it in a tree, glass, whatever I'm doing, and let it dry. So I probably don't allow it to do what it's supposed to do. And secondly, I'm in pretty good shape now, but there's a time where, you can't afford to buy the whole quote unquote system. So you have maybe the right base layer, or maybe you have the right outer layer, but they don't work together, right? Where you don't have the right components to allow it to do what it's supposed to do. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from, my high-tech redneck background.
Yeah. So, but believe me, I'd love for you to buy, every layer, not every layer, but I'd love for you to buy a full Sitka system or somebody, because I think you're going to get the best user experience. But I also understand that yeah, the product is expensive, and it's expensive for a reason. And like I said, I think people need to look at it as an investment. This is not something you're going to take out and wear out in a year or 2 years, or generally even 3. Like, most people are going to get tired of wearing it before it wears out on them. But with that said, you really don't need that many layers. And so, what I recommend to people is, okay, if you've got some base layers that you like, doesn't matter which ones, but as long as they're either, a nice synthetic or a nice wool base layer, maybe keep what you've got and try one of the soft shell layers. So, maybe try a pair of mountain pants, or maybe try a windstopper mountain jacket as an example, right on top of that base layer, because that's going to be a good investment of your time. Like I said, that's going to be the outward facing part, your armor from the elements. It's going to have the bells and whistles. So maybe you just start there. And then maybe you think about, an insulation layer. So, maybe you're looking at just 2 or 3 pieces to start, understanding that, you've already got things to supplement your clothing system. You bring up a great point, and it's one that I hear a lot, and I've even heard it from a lot of experienced people that take me a little bit by surprise. And that is, I get to the top of a ridge, I've hiked, I've sweated, I immediately strip that off, I hang it in a tree, and I put on a dry one. No offense to you or anybody else, but if you're going to do that, you could just as easily wear a cotton t-shirt. Now, the cotton t-shirt won't dry as quickly in the tree. One of the benefits you get with a synthetic or a synthetic clothing system, or a high-end technical clothing system, is that you don't need to wear as many layers as you think. So if you could imagine, teaching the guys I taught in the military, we've got a very limited amount of space in our pack, and that space in that pack is consumed with, we'll call it operational gear. So things that they cannot leave behind for the success of the mission. What is always the last thing to be considered is your own personal, we'll call it well-being or comfort. So there's not a lot of room in your pack for something nice like an insulated jacket or a second base layer top. So what you have is what you have. I'll speak for myself. I never carry any extra base layers. So if I have a base layer top on, that's the only one I have on the trip. And if I'm not wearing the bottoms, then I'll at least bring the bottoms, because, you know, there may be a point in time in the week or the 2 weeks I'm out there that I may need those. But when I get to the top of the ridge and I get up there to start wanting the glass, the very first thing I do, and this is so critical, is the first thing I do is put on a beanie or a watch cap, and I put on some type of puffy jacket. And I do this for a couple reasons. One, I know I'm going to cool off quickly through this evaporative cooling and potentially convective cooling, because the wind's going to be blowing. So I want to trap and bottle that body heat. One, so I don't cool off and become chilled. And two, because I want to harness that body heat to dry those base layers out very quickly. And so I put the puffy jacket on. I just put it right on top of everything I'm wearing. And then I put the watch cap on top of my head. And your head is really like a chimney. And so the watch cap is kind of like the damper on the chimney. And you can regulate your heat by just putting the beanie on and taking it off. And so I get up there, I put the puffy on, so I have the warmth, I have some protection. I throw the watch cap on. I start to break out my glass, my tripod, look about where I want a glass. And before I know it, I'm drying out. And the reason is because base layers are so efficient, it doesn't really matter if you're damp on the second or third layer that you're wearing, because your body can't feel that. The only thing that matters is the layer next to your skin. And so you get up there, you throw on a puffy, and that's why I said, yeah, somebody should buy like maybe a pair of pants and maybe a puffy jacket. Like if I had to pick two pieces for somebody to buy and try to start wearing and integrating, those would be the two pieces, because they're so integral to everything that we do out there. So what that does is it allows you to leave some layers behind, so you're not carrying them in your pack. You know, maybe if you have a big base camp, you can, you know, bring them in on horses if you really feel like it, because you don't want to, you know, people like fresh clothes. I get it. But I'm saying you don't need it. But it allows you to not carry that in your pack. It also allows you that you don't have to spend the money to buy 2 or 3 of everything, because you just really don't need it.
You know
Go ahead.
What's interesting right there is you say, you know, it surprises you to hear, and you hear it from old school guys, are the two things you said, and it makes perfect sense, because the older generation, we're not used to this, right? Because you had a cotton shirt, and that's what you did, right? You brought 2 and you hung one up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as you're saying this, I'm like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. We never, you know, you don't have the faith in the equipment. That's just what you always did. Nobody left camp with just one, with no, you know, change of base layer back when, you know, I started elk hunting right here in North Idaho, you know, 20 something years ago, 25 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of cool, because it does make sense.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I get that a lot as well. People say, you know, why do I need all this technical clothing? Like I've been able to do this, you know, or my dad's been able to do this, you know, for 20 years, 50 years. And we never had any of that. You know, we had wool shirts and blue jeans and, you know, cotton underwear. And it's true. They were able to do that. But, you know, with no disrespect, there's a saying we used to have, and it was, it's easy to be hard, but it's hard to be smart. And what we meant by that was, yeah, we're tough guys and we can gut it out, but why would you go and purposely gut it out when you don't have to anymore? And so at the time we were wearing surplus, you know, Army surplus wool jackets and maybe even wool pants or blue jeans. Like that was the best we had at the time for what we were doing. Right. I mean, it's not the case anymore. And so, you know, I value my time out in the mountains, you know, as much as anything, because, you know, I get to spend a good amount of time, but not as much as I used to. And I'm also very serious about my hunting. I want to go out there and enjoy myself. I want to go out there and be efficient. I don't want, here's what I said to the guys in the military, and here's what I'll tell any mountain hunter. I don't want to be pushed out of the mountains because of the weather. I want to leave on my own terms. I want to leave when I'm ready. And a lot of times, if you're sitting there glassing and you're freezing your balls off because you're wearing cotton and you don't have that puffy jacket, and you say, well, you know what, I'm going to drop down off this ridge, or I'm going to go back to camp, or I'm going to start a fire, I'm going to do anything but not keep glassing, you're giving up opportunity. And 20 years ago, there was a hell of a lot more opportunity in the mountains than there are today. And I'm not that good a hunter, and I have to take advantage of every opportunity I can get. And so I'm going to go out there and be as efficient as possible. And that's what all these clothing systems are doing. Yeah, they're lighter weight. Yeah, they've got cool camo on them. And yeah, they probably fit better. But ultimately, they are more efficient and giving us a better opportunity at success, because we don't have to think about this shit as much when we're out there. I don't have to spend the time stripping off clothes to put other clothes on, when I can just sit there and put a jacket on, sit down and eat, some granola and go find a buck I want to go after. So I hope I'm not preaching, but I hear that a lot, and it's like, yeah, but it's different now. There's better stuff out there, and I'm just trying to educate people. And really, I truly mean this. I'd love for them to buy Sitka. Ultimately, I really don't care what they buy. They need to buy what's right for them. I just think people need to have a little knowledge and understanding, and then go find what's going to work best for them. And I think they're going to be really surprised, like you were, like how good some of this stuff really is.
I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation. Do you have time to continue? Because there's no end to my questions.
Let's put it this way, Rob. I've never done an hour podcast.
So
we're getting deep, though. This is a good conversation. I hope you're appreciating it, because
I
sometimes
am.
I can get too in the weeds.
No, I am. And it's seriously, when you said that you hear this a lot from old school guys, it was an epiphany for me, because that's the fact. I mean, you were a rookie. You were an idiot if you took off out of camp with not at least one base layer in your pack, because
right.
breathability was like, yeah, sure. Whatever.
So now, and I'm just making the statement about myself, or if I was training guys and we were going out for a 4 or 5 day patrol, like, we were idiots, or I would consider them idiots if they brought anything more than what they were wearing on their body for base layers.
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't need that. Like, so there's definitely things I bring more than one of. And those are socks and gloves, because, extremities are so difficult to manage, for lots of reasons. Physiologically, there's a lot of reasons, your body, some people have poor circulation. Some people have damaged their hands and feet, like me, with repeated, exposure to the cold. Sometimes it's driven by hydration when you're out there and you're dehydrated. Sometimes it's driven by the amount of food or the lack of food that you can eat. Like, there's so many reasons, but hands and feet are difficult. But the reality is, if my hands or my feet don't work, like, I'm effed. Like, I can't walk out of the mountains, or I can't climb onto my horse to get out of the mountains. I can't start a fire. I can't do something as basic as, flick a lighter to start my stove. And so those are things where, I'll carry multiple pairs, and I will, like thin liner gloves, like I'll dry those out once or twice a day, depending on the environment. But I can dry those out pretty quickly and efficiently. Socks, I don't bring a pair of socks per day. Now, some people may have to, but I don't. But I definitely change into dry socks every night. But as far as the clothing on your body, I don't carry anything extra into the field. The base layer I'm wearing is all I carry. The pants I carry or I'm wearing, that's all I bring. The puffy jacket, the rain gear, it's one of everything except gloves and socks. Just because, one, it's durable, two, it works, and three, it's so efficient. It's just, again, unless you're packing in or flying in, and have a little bit of extra space. But, even in Alaska, Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, I was going to say when you're flying in Super Cubs, like you're definitely limited to the amount of weight you can carry, but you're also limited to the amount of weight you can carry, if you're packing in, and the Wrangler's like, listen, you get 70 pounds in a pannier and that's all you get. And so you really do have to start picking and choosing. And so what I tell people is, would you rather bring more food or an extra bottle of bourbon or, a book or whatever it is? Or would you rather bring extra, long underwear base layers that you really are probably never going to use? And I always default to the extra bottle of bourbon, between us. That's just me, but you just don't need as many extra clothes. And so, a good practice to get into, as people are kind of learning this, and some people do this, some people don't. I'm definitely the former. I definitely do this, but I write my gear list out, and then as I'm either out in the field or a lot of times when I'm back, I sit there when I'm unpacking. I'm like, okay, what did I use and what did I never touch? And there's a good chance if it's something I never touched, it's something I'm probably not going to bring on the next trip. And, here's the cool part about everything we're talking about. Hunting season's only so long, unfortunately. But that doesn't stop us from going out in the mountains in the field like year round. And that's when that's when I would practice all this stuff. That's when I would try new ideas. When I didn't have the once in a lifetime elk tag in my pocket. I think spring is an awesome time to try new gear. Not that I don't value hunting bears and turkeys, but, I would rather try stuff in the spring when the weather's kind of dynamic and it's not great. It's like the preseason for elk season. Because ultimately I'd rather, kill the elk or the mule deer, and maybe, bumble a little bit with my system in the spring on a black bear hunt. That's just my personal preference, but it's a great time to go and try new things. And so spring is just like spring training camp for baseball. It's like the perfect time to go out and try your new gear, try a new stove, try a new pair of boots, whatever it is, and kind of dial yourself in for fall season. So, that's what's fun about it is you extend the season now and, make it year round like a lot of us do.
Yeah, and to back up just a little bit, we mentioned cost. Some years ago, it started with boots, and then it went to rain gear for me. I started to realize that when you take the jump in quality, you're taking a jump in price. And had to rectify with my wife, 20 something years ago. When you start spending big money on equipment like boots, like I said, for me, it was first for boots. I don't wear them every day. So those boots they're going to last me several years because I'm only wearing them in the woods. And then it became with rain gear. It was like, you know what? To get quality rain gear, I'm not going to wear it every day. And if it extends my season because it's crappy out, you start to come to grips with, hey, I'm taking a week off of work. That's my week. It might be your 1 week a year, or your 2 weeks a year. If it makes it, if you stay in the field longer. So then it's rolled into this technical clothing. Like, okay, this is how I come to grips with spending $200 on a pair of pants. And I think people can take that and start to realize that hey, that's how you come to grips with paying this kind of money.
Yeah. Well, I could go a bunch of different ways, but so what, one of the things is trying to find, the value in buying more of these technical products. And so, I would say that, everybody's got their own personal preference, but I would say, especially if you bought something, say, in a solid color. So let's just say base layers or that pair of mountain pants. I don't just wear it for hunting anymore. If I'm out, scouting, shed hunting, training, backpacking around, working out, if I'm, working around my property, I'm not I'm not in the construction trade, but I do some stuff around the property. I'm wearing it. Like I see guys, guys on roofs, guys framing, and they're wearing a cotton hoodie, which I understand is cheap, and they're freezing their ever loving ass off. It's like, man, like that gear you bought for hunting, you could be wearing on your job site. Like that pair of mountain pants is going to be just as badass when you're hiking, going to High Lake to go fish with your kids, or when you're, training, is when you're hunting, and, try to extend the season. And so, yeah, we like to say specialized clothing and equipment, but that doesn't mean that it only has to be worn, or, only can be worn on an elk hunt. And the other thing is, it's like, listen, a lot of the stuff I wear for my big game hunts, I'll bet you 75% of it, I also wear the same stuff on my whitetail hunts when I'm sitting in a tree stand. And maybe I just have a few, special items that I put over top that, maybe are, let's just say dead quiet, or maybe have a zipper in the right place, or maybe have a pass through for my harness. But, these aren't things that, me personally, I'm just wearing, 1 or 2 weeks out of the year. I'm they're just as good doing anything else as they are, hunting. Obviously when you have the camel pattern on, it makes it a little more specialized and tuned in, but this is just good performance gear. And when you start to look at it like that, and you're like, okay, well, now I'm actually wearing it, say 100 days a year. Well, does it provide more value now with the cost you're spending? Because we all have to come to that conclusion on our own, right? I mean, boots, packs, like weapons. Like I remember when a bow was, $400, $500, $600, and now you can't even buy an aluminum bow for less than 12, and carbon bows are 16 and $1,800. You're like, when did that happen?
Yeah.
And that's compounds, obviously, but you understand what I'm saying? Like, but it's all going up.
Yeah, $1,500 for recurve is not out of the ordinary. So you got the gear. Touch a little bit on cleaning and washing, and the importance of keeping that fabric open, breathing.
Yeah. So, like I said, like base layers, I go on a 10-day trip. I just wear them. I never take them off. But when you come home, you got to wash that stuff. Some people are afraid to wash gear, and some things do need to be treated with a little more care than others. But generally speaking, like, your base layers, your pants, things like that, can be washed just normally like everything else. What we generally say is, use powdered detergents and just throw it in your washing machine. You'll notice that most of the time when you pull these garments out, especially after a pretty aggressive spin cycle, they're damn near dry when you pull them out of the washer. That kind of is a testament to how well these, garments don't hold on to moisture. You can throw them in the dryer. It's better to air dry them. It's just, you don't need to, cook them on high for 45 minutes. They're going to be dry a lot sooner than normal. A lot of the lofted garments, so the puffy jackets and things, again, you can certainly wash them, but hang dry, things like that. You don't have to baby any of these products. The one that I'm as guilty, or probably guiltier than anybody else, is the rain gear. So if you're wearing rain gear, to keep it performing as best you can, you do want to wash it. And the reason is because there's these pores, or these holes, where the moisture goes through, and it's got this chemical treatment on the outside, this DWR, to keep the water beating up and running off. Those pores are easily clogged with dirt, body oil, sunscreen, insect repellent, etc. So you need to clean that to keep the pores open. And then the DWR on the outside actually replenishes itself by being washed and put in a hot dryer. So the rain gear is one that, and I don't, just to be completely honest, I don't know if I've ever washed rain gear more than 3 times in my life. But with that said, I probably haven't bought a lot of rain gear with my own money either. So I've abused the hell out of it, but it definitely cuts down on the life of the garment if you do not wash rain gear. And you don't have to wash it after every trip, but I would say certainly at the end of a 3-month hunting season, I would wash my rain gear for
Interesting.
next spring. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what kind of detergent? And you say you should put it in the dryer?
Yeah. 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 You should put it in the dryer. It doesn't matter. Again, just like a powdered detergent. The reason we just tell people to stay away from some of these liquid detergents, because you can't tell people every single one, but generally speaking, some of these liquid detergents, they apply a film to some of these garments, and the film from the liquid can fill in some of these pores and cut down on that movement of moisture and breathability. So a powdered detergent, generally speaking, is the best way to go. If you're going to do any aftermarket treatments on the DWR, and there's a bunch out there where you just spray them on. So you wash the garment, spray it on, let them hang dry. Sometimes you throw it in the dryer. The heat actually kind of rejuvenates and gets the chemical DWR treatment on the outside kind of going again. So again, you don't need to throw it on high and cook it for an hour. It's going to dry pretty quick, but you can certainly do it. Like I said, you shouldn't have to spend the money on these garments and baby them. Like, you're not babying them when you're in the field. You certainly shouldn't have to baby them when you're washing them. But again, it's not like, so let's take our whitetail gear for an example. We all know that, the guys that are, hardcore whitetail hunters, they're coming back, they're ozoning their stuff, they're washing it every couple days. Like, you do that over the course of a 2-month season, like, you're washing it a lot. And I don't want to tell you the number, because I probably don't know it. I probably don't remember the exact number, but I remember when we were updating our whitetail line a couple years ago, and this is very important to us that these garments are durable and last. And so I forget what the standard, it's like 20 or 25 washes. I could be completely wrong here, but it's like 20 or 25 washes is like the standard wash cycle test for garments. Like, wash it 20 or 25 times. If it passes and the stitching doesn't fray, etc., like, it passes this, clothing standard. And we knew that the average whitetail hunter was going to wash their garments probably more than that in a given season, especially the guys that are like super fanatical about it. So I believe, I'm really confident in saying we 4x'd that number.
Wow.
To see what the washing would do. And it's fine. So my point is, when people are like, "Oh, I don't know, man, I spent a hell of a lot of money on this Fanatic system and I don't want to wash it." And I'm like, actually, you're gonna lose performance by not washing it. Go ahead and wash the hell out of it. And if for some reason it does fall apart, that's our fault. That's not yours. But that's the reality of that pursuit, right? And it's the same with you. It's like, listen, you need to shimmy across trees to save your life, and not fall into a raging torrent of a river. Man, if you tear the crotch out of those pants, that's our fault. That's not your fault. So you certainly shouldn't have to baby them when you're throwing them in the washer at the end of your trip.
So while we're on the subject of rain gear, I've not tried Sitka rain gear. What I have is Kuiu, and it's served me pretty well, because I like to have at least, well, the pants and jacket. Now, I use the jacket as part of a layering system for, wind, as well as repellency, and the pants pretty much just for the repellency. Last year, and they've worked well. Last year, last day of my elk hunt, we were looking at just a massive hole that we were going to drop into. And I got partway down there, and it was just a bad idea. It was not, getting an elk out of there. It was just not in the cards. So we screwed around, and this storm come in completely unexpected. And we got under spruce tree, of course, put all our rain gear on, get under spruce tree, and we realized, hey, this thing's here. I mean, it's going to stay. So we decided we'd head back to camp. And I'll tell you, it wasn't a life and death situation, but it was, I had never seen it rain that hard. And by the time I got back to camp, I was absolutely soaked right through the rain gear. Now, is that due to the force? Because it was just this crazy, heavy, hard rain. And what kind of rain gear do you guys have comparable to stuff in my pack day in, day out?
Yep. So let's talk rain gear in general first, and then we can get a little more specific. So the way I look at rain gear is my insurance policy. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't know about you. I know you live in North Idaho, and I used to live in coastal Alaska. So I'm a little hydrophobic. Like, I don't like water anymore, even though I was in the Navy for so many years. I don't go out at the trailhead saying, man, I hope it rains for 10 straight days and I get to wear my rain gear every day. Right. Like, I actually find it, like, when I come home and I've never ever touch my rain gear and pull it out of the bottom of my pack, like, yeah, I'm not going to leave that behind next time just because I didn't wear it this time, but it's my insurance policy. And so everybody's got their own level of risk or ability to buy different insurance policies. Some people have a lot, some people have a little. I think rain gear is one thing you don't want to skimp on, and it's not inexpensive. And depending on where you live and how you hunt, you may never use it. And so you may choose to not spend as much on that insurance policy. But for folks like us and people coming out west, if they haven't experienced it, or people that live in certain geographical regions, like I talked about, like it's a necessity, and it can be life and death. And that's why I call it that insurance policy, like the storm you experienced. You want it to fit well, because you may have to hike out of that hellhole wearing those pants. And, you may have to wear it on a 10-day, sheep hunt, as an example, and hike 15 miles a day wearing it, or an elk hunt. And so, as you go up in price, things like fit and articulation, which is part of fit, and all these things and features, like, does it have zippers to vent? Can I put it on over my boots? Do I have to, stop and take my boots off to put my pants on, and vice versa? Like, all these things start to come into play. The other thing is, when you put on rain gear, all of this, I like to say that, listen, at the end of the day, none of this clothing is like some superhero costume. Like, I don't put on any of this shit and feel like it's a Superman's cape, and all of a sudden, because I'm wearing, this brand or that brand, that all of a sudden I'm indestructible and I can hike up the mountain and I never get tired and I never get wet. Like, you have to be what I call an active participant. And part of that is listening to podcasts and trying to educate yourself. And part of it is being really self-aware when you're out there. And when you put on rain gear, you have to understand that you are putting a barrier between your skin and that warm, moist environment and the outside environment. So you need to regulate your pace. You need to understand what you're applying in your system and how you need to modify your behavior because of that. And so, yeah, and I'm not speaking specifically to your case, I'll get to that in a minute, but you want to be able to say, okay, I need to regulate my pace a little bit, even if you have pit zips and leg zips, like you're still going to have to regulate your pace, or you're going to sweat profusely, overwhelm your system, get your clothes damp, which is not that big a deal. What the bigger deal is you're going to also start to dehydrate yourself. And so this is something I call the vicious cycle, because people are going to hike hard and they're going to sweat out their system and they're going to vent and they're going to dry out, but they're going to dehydrate themselves. And so now they're starting to compound a bunch of problems. So to get back to your hellhole scenario, because I wasn't there, and I mean, I am familiar with most of the competitors' rain gear, but I would say that where I see most of the issues people have is you overwhelm the system. And so if your rain gear doesn't breathe super well and you don't modify your pace, and maybe you're wearing too many clothing layers underneath, what happens generally is the moisture is coming from your body in the form of sweat, moving through those layers. That temperature gradient is continuing to get weak, and then it hits the inside of this barrier, this rain gear, and it doesn't have enough ass to push through this final barrier. And so what happens is it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where people are actually making themselves wet from the inside with their own sweat. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's what happened to you, but I've seen it happen a lot. And where you can really see this physical manifestation is when it's very cold. And what happens is the moisture moves through all these warm layers, hits the inside of the rain gear, and literally freezes to the inside of the rain gear because it can't move through quickly enough. And then guess what happens? Then it blocks off all the pores, and then nothing breathes. So that's one possibility. And again, that's why you want to wear as few layers as possible underneath, and you want to have a rain gear that breathes well. The other issue is that a lot of times when we're wearing rain gear, and this is kind of the dirty little secret nobody wants to talk about, right? And so I'm going to share it here with you, Rob. So
nice.
Take that for what it's worth. But again, and I'm trying not to teach a science class here, but I think it's really important that people understand the why behind some of this stuff. So we talk about this warm, humid environment in our clothing layer. When it's when the difference between what's inside our system and outside the system is really dramatic. So let's say it's 98.6 inside and 100% humidity. And we're in an environment, let's just say in high altitude Colorado. So it's 20 degrees outside and I'm at 11,000 feet and it's very dry. The movement of moisture through that system is going to be so quick, so efficient. You're going to be like, this is the best rain gear I have ever used in my entire life, right? Because the conditions are absolutely primed and optimal for that moisture to move through. But now let's take your scenario as an example. You're in North Idaho. It's raining. It's probably, I'll just make it up, but you tell me, was it like in the 40s maybe?
Yeah, it was the temperature. Yeah, the temperature was dropping like a rock. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The temperature was dropping, but the humidity, the dew point in the air was probably increasing, is my guess.
Yeah.
And so what happens is when we need rain gear the most, when we really need rain gear and need it to save our lives and need to rely on it, is when the environmental conditions are absolutely the worst to get moisture to move through that system. It's just, I'm not a physics instructor by any means. I'm actually an idiot, right? But physics dictates that these things have to seek equilibrium. The inside and the outside need to seek equilibrium. Well, when the humidity outside is as close to as much as the humidity inside, and the temperature starts to not be all that different, dude, there's nowhere for this moisture to move. And so that's where all of a sudden super, super efficient, well thought out clothing systems are going to perform as well as they can. depending on the situation, it's not going to perform nearly as well as that high altitude, low humidity, super cold environment that we talked about in Colorado. And so if people understand this, then they can become the responsible adult, or the active participant, as I like to say, and go, hey, you know what, guys, we're going to have to walk slower. You know what, guys, we're going to have to take more breaks. Or, you know what, guys, I'm going to have to strip a layer off underneath this rain gear, understanding I'm going to generate heat as I hike up out of this canyon, and I don't need as much insulation underneath. Like, these are all things that people need to do, and they can't just assume that, like, I can't be out there dressing and undressing everybody for every scenario. And so if you understand the why, then you can begin to apply it. So, I can't bash anybody's rain gear. I can tell you that I know for a fact some rain gear is far more breathable than other rain gear, certain constructions, certain materials. But if you put all that aside, the one thing that's the constant is the human being wearing it. And so you have to understand the limitations, because everything has limitations. When I'm designing a product, I don't design I like to say I don't design just a jacket, or I don't design just a pair of pants. I try to design, if somebody has a new insulation like this Kelvin Light Down we just came out with, it's like, oh my God, this is incredible. Primaloft built this amazing insulation just for us. We're the only people in the world that have access to it. How does that integrate into a system? Because if I don't say how does it integrate into a system to work together to give this great experience, then you're just building a cool jacket, which quite honestly is a little boring. And then it really doesn't perform all that good. And everybody's like, yeah, okay, well, that was cool, but it didn't really work that well. So you have to think about it the same way. And it's like, did I build a good system? Do all these things work together? And then understand the limitations, because every time you design something, you have to give up something to get something else. And what are the priorities? And that's a whole nother podcast, but, but anyways, to go back to your rain gear scenario, I wouldn't necessarily just blame the rain gear. There's a lot of factors at play that people need to understand. And, maybe you could go back and think about it, or maybe the next time you do that, you could consider it. Your final point, could the conditions overwhelm the laminate and drive moisture through it? Yes, that's probably a lower probability than the user wetting themselves out from the inside out. But yes, it does happen. And a lot of times I see it on thighs of the pants, or shoulder straps of the pack, or any of these kind of high abrasion areas. So if you're bust and brush a lot, your thighs take a lot of abuse. The shoulders take a lot of abuse from pack straps. You'll wear off that durable water repellent coating. So, you'll notice that, because water won't bead up on the outside and run off. There's things called head pressure. So, head pressure is basically the amount of driving force that the water would have being pushed in. And so, there's this push-pull scenario where I'm generating heat and pushing moisture through. But, at a certain point, you can get moisture to come from the outside in if there's enough, driving force. So if it's wet enough, if there's water on the face of the garment because the DWR isn't working, if the rain is just of such a strong force, like, there is a possibility that water could come through. But it's a lesser possibility than the user just not understanding the limitations of the system. So that was a long answer, and I'm not questioning you. I'm just trying to paint with a broad brush here.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I leaned towards, was that was such an anomaly of the driving, the weight of the rain. I mean, it was just so heavy. And honestly, I had just a merino shirt, wool shirt under it. And the reason why I mentioned the hellhole, because, like I said, it wasn't a life and death situation, but had we been an hour and a half deeper into that hole and had to come out of there, I mean, hindsight, that was that could have been a bad situation.
Could have been a bad situation.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. All rain gear, everything wears out at a certain point. And
Yeah.
I don't know how new
Yeah.
it was, and I don't know how old it was, and I don't want to question anybody's, rain gear integrity necessarily of their product. But I just say, but eventually stuff does wear out.
Sure.
And you live in an environment and you hunt in mountains that, there's not a lot of room for error in some of the places you go and some of the things you do. And so, rain gear, that probably means more to you and is probably higher on your insurance policy list than somebody who lives down in Arizona, as an example, right?
Yeah.
They can get away with a lot that we can't get away with in the Northern Rockies. It's just reality.
Yeah. And you mentioned the head pressure again, in Northern Idaho, which I haven't been elk hunting up here much in the last 4 or 5 years, just wolves and,
Yep.
wolves and people. I've been more in the central part of the state, but in Northern Idaho, one of the wettest you can possibly get is pushing through this brush. I call it snow
Oh
brush,
God. Yep.
huckleberry brush. And it's constantly, you mentioned head pressure. It's constantly pushing against your rain gear. And your system will fail pretty quick in this crap.
Yep. I see it a lot in coastal Alaska, British Columbia. I see it a lot in Pacific Northwest. But the reason this is important to understand is, and I'll go back to this insurance analogy, and maybe it's a bad one, maybe it's not, but if I'm a single guy running around on my own, like I probably don't even have life insurance, or I don't even, maybe I don't even make enough money to have car insurance. Like I'm not endorsing these things. I'm just saying it's a reality sometimes. But then all of a sudden I have family, I have kids and this and that. And maybe now I'm taking out a life insurance policy and maybe I'm upping it as I have number of kids, whatever the case may be. If you think about it the same way, and let's use this Arizona analogy for a second. If I'm down here and I live in Arizona and I'm chasing elk and mule deer and life is grand and the weather's great most of the time. And, really I have to, the things I have to contend with are heat, and heat exhaustion and trying to stay hydrated, things like that. And now I draw a tag to hunt in Montana for elk, or I'm going, Pacific Northwest to chase mountain goats, or, I drew my sheep tag for the Chugach Mountains of Alaska. You need to sit and think about your system and understand that you need more insurance when you go to these other areas. Now, conversely, if I'm going from, when I lived on Kodiak, Alaska, and I went and hunted, eastern Colorado for mule deer, came down to Arizona to hunt late season mule deer, like I literally called it easy living. And I ended up bringing too much stuff because I was used to a certain way of living and needed a certain insurance policy, which I didn't necessarily need in some of these other geographical areas. Not that you couldn't get in trouble, but for different reasons. But people need to understand that maybe what works in one geographical area, because people are moving around a lot, to hunt and buying tags in different states and playing that game. They need to consider upgrading some of this stuff depending on where they're going, or they could find themselves in that situation you described. And, I don't want to be dramatic and talk about life and death, but like I say, you don't want to be a statistic, and that statistic doesn't just have to mean like living and dying, but like I like to say I don't ever want to be that guy, because especially because I'm supposed to be like the person who knows better. Like if I'm all of a sudden the guy that somebody has to come rescue, or I'm the guy that they pull out of the field with hypothermia, like I don't want to be that guy, right?
I never thought about that. That would be really bad.
It would be really bad. And there's a little bit of pressure there, but that's also being a statistic, and I don't want to be a statistic, right? Like none of us do. So, we have to consider these things, and that's why it's important to understand and not just get pigeonholed into our one, unless you just never go anywhere but your own home state, which is fine.
Yeah.
But a lot of us do travel now to do these things.
Now, so what line of rain gear would I have in my pack for that scenario. Because, like I said, it's part of my system. I have it in my pack at all times.
Yeah. So, I'll talk generalities and I can talk specifics at the end. But um, when it comes to rain gear, you get what you pay for. And so, again, depending on where you live, you might not even own rain gear, or you might not choose to spend a lot of money on it. But to spend a little bit of money, $100 for a pair of pants, just to speak broadly, is probably not going to serve you well on a 10-day sheep hunt in the North Country. Like, there's a good chance they're not going to work, or they're going to fail at some point. And there's a really good chance you're not going to have them at the end of that trip, right?
Yeah, they're going to fail when you need them.
They're going to fail when you need them. So, there's different kinds of constructions of rain gear. There's a 2-layer rain gear, which tends to breathe pretty good, but it's also can be contaminated pretty quick from body oils and insect repellent, sunscreen, things like that. And then you have something called a 3-layer construction. So there's a face. So that's the exterior. There's the interior called the backer or the lining. And then you have the in-between, which is, whatever this laminate is. Those tend to be the more durable, robust, we'll call it higher performance rain gears. Rain gears can be made with polyester or nylon, generally speaking. Nylon is going to be more durable than a polyester. So if you're, bust and brush a lot, if you're climbing over a lot of rock and talus, nylon's going to serve you better than polyester as a general rule. I'm just trying to paint with a broad brush. At Sitka, I have 3 different types of rain gear that I think they're very different for very different applications. And so I have our Cloudburst rain gear, which is a 3-layer. So everything we have is 3-layer. So it's a 3-layer rain gear. It's the lightest rain gear currently in the Sitka line. There's some features like pit zips. All our pants have full side zips to vent and or put them on over your boots without taking your boots off. It's a polyester face, and it's the great set of rain gear for the backpack hunter. So kind of like what we're talking about and describing. Yeah. We also have something called a Thunderhead. So the Thunderhead is, again, a 3-layer, pit zips, full side zips, all that kind of stuff. But it's got a brushed face, so the exterior is kind of fuzzy and soft, and so it's quiet. And so, that's the rain gear for, people who not just are hunting in rainy conditions. Let's just say Pacific Northwest, North Idaho, things like that. But also when you have very wet vegetation. So, you talked about going through wet vegetation. Like, I can wake up, it can be sunny, but it rained the night before.
Yeah.
If I have to push through a bunch of ferns and vegetation, and that's what basically I have to hunt in that day, I'm going to put on a pair of Thunderhead quiet rain gear pants, because that's what I'm going to be stalking in. And if I don't, I'm going to be wet from the waist down about 30 seconds outside of camp.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep. And so I like to say, maybe that's not the rain gear I'm going to wear for the 10-day backpack hunt, just because it's a little bit heavier because of the face than the Cloudburst. But depending on what you're doing, it could be the right choice. And then finally, you move up to what we call the Storm Front. And the Storm Front is this, it's called a Pro Shell, a Gore-Tex Pro Shell. It's nylon face. It's crazy, crazy durable. It's got all kinds of bells and whistles. So the pants have cargo pockets as well as full side zips. You have, 5 or 6 different pockets on the jacket, full featured hood, pit zips, everything. And this is, I call it the guide worthy rain gear. And it's not just for guides, but if you're going on a hunt, like I went on a hunt a couple years ago to BC, we flew in and we were on horseback for 14 days in the wilderness in northern BC in October. Like
Awesome.
it either rained or snowed every day.
Awesome.
Like that is my hunting outfit. And so that's where, you know, it was worth it to me to have that rain gear. It's going to be a little heavier again because of all the features, but it's also going to be something that you're going to live in. So, you know, if that's your expectation, you know, and a lot of these guides in the North Country, like they're living in their rain gear, like that's the choice. You know, if you're going on that mountain caribou hunt or your moose hunt, like, you know, that could be a great choice for you. So, you know, three different sets, very distinct, all Gore-Tex, and all 3-layer. So, you know, again, depending on where you're living and what you do, you know, one of those may be a good choice, or you may choose to go, you know, honestly, you may choose to go with the $200 set of rain gear that's a 2-layer, that balls up pretty quick, and, you know, you hope to never use it, and you use it you see it every 3 years as you pull it out of your pack to, you know, to hose your pack off.
Yeah. 2 more things, and then I'll let you go.
Okay.
New products. So you keep mentioning
Yeah.
this. You keep mentioning this new insulation you got. Hit that for a bit. Tell us what
Yeah.
that's all about.
So we just launched something called the Kelvin Light Down. It's a jacket and a pant. It's an insulated jacket and pant. The cool thing, you know, so it's a jacket and a pant, right? You're like, God, the world doesn't need another jacket and pant. And I don't tend to disagree with you, but the way we did it and how we did it and what we used to make it, is pretty incredible. So what I like to say about Sitka is we scratch make the biscuit. So, you know, grandma makes a biscuit from scratch. It tastes awesome. I make a biscuit from, you know, a box, a premix from a box, and it tastes good, but it's never like grandma's. I like to say we scratch make the biscuit like grandma. So the down in this jacket is a synthetic down blend. So it's 80% down, 20% synthetic. The down is a proprietary down. We worked with Primaloft for 3 years. So Primaloft is a premium insulation supplier. We worked with Primaloft and we came up with a 900 fill down. So the only place it exists in the world right now is in this jacket and pant, specifically for Sitka. The 900 fill means it's got great loft, so good warmth to weight. But I'm not a huge proponent of pure down or even treated downs for the backcountry because they can become compromised by moisture and lose their loft. So we blended in 20% synthetic insulation, and synthetic insulation isn't affected by moisture. And so I like to say that the synthetic acts as scaffolding for the down so that when moisture is introduced into that insulation, it's not going to completely just lose its loft and clump and then lose its warmth. So a lot going on in the insulation. And then I didn't want to just take this insulation and put it everywhere because honestly, it's not meant to just be used everywhere. Down insulation is very compressible. That's one of the things that makes it warm is that it has a lot of loft, but it also is easy to lose that loft. So we paneled in pure synthetic insulation in what I call compression zones. So under your arms, down the side of your jacket where your arms are naturally hanging. If I put down there, you're just going to compress it and you're not really going to get the most bang for your buck. So we put synthetic, which is, I'll call it somewhat compression proof. We also paneled that synthetic insulation in the bottom third of the jacket in the back and then the whole seat of the pant. So with the understanding you're going to be sitting down glassing from a rock or the ground or on an ATV seat or a saddle of a horse or whatever. And then we wrap the whole thing in a fabric, that textile that we built specifically for us, which is a 2-way stretch nylon. So nylon again is durable. So we wanted to try to provide as much durability as we could to a lofted garment, to a puffy jacket and pant. They're never going to be as durable as like your mountain pants, but you know, you also shouldn't brush up against a rock or a twig and just destroy the garment either. So really cool features. The jacket balls up into its own hand pocket, makes a nice little pillow. the jacket weighs 17 ounces, so just a little over a pound. And then the pants have full side zips. I chose not to run the pant all the way down to your ankle. So they're cropped about 1 inch below our knee pads and just above the top of a 10-inch boot. Save some weight, save some bulk, save some cost. I've never really gone out there and kind of complained about my ankles being cold when I had a pair of boots on. So just chose not to run them all the way to the bottom. The pants come in at 13 ounces. So the whole jacket and pant combo weigh less than 2 pounds, but just incredibly warm and really high performance. If you're going on a float hunt in Alaska and this is the only insulation, you're bringing one insulation, I might not recommend it because, again, down can become compromised, and our down is treated with a DWR treatment. I'd probably recommend maybe a pure synthetic jacket at that point. But for a lot of what we're doing, hunts in the Rocky Mountains in the fall, things like that, I think it's a great jacket for that person who's weight conscious and looking for some, high performance in a lofted piece.
Cool, man. This has been longer than I generally do, but I'll tell you, this is fascinating. It's not on you, man. I still had the one question I missed, and it would have been back when we talked about base layers. Is I struggle with like being a bow hunter, being a traditional bow hunter. I don't know if it's different than being a compound guy, but baggy clothes are a problem. How tight do you want this stuff to fit? Right. Yeah, and keep the insulation and keep the product doing what it's designed to do.
Are you specifically talking about base layers or just the whole system?
The whole system, because honestly, I look at the jackets and it's a struggle, like a hoodie, it's a struggle because I don't want anything baggy because the way I draw my bow and the way I anchor.
Yeah.
But that might be just a whole nother podcast.
Well, I mean, we can certainly circle back and have another podcast. I don't mind doing that. I would generally say that, for base layers, you don't want a compression fit. You remember, years ago, it was kind of cool to have these compression garments. Mm-hmm. In cold weather, just generally speaking, for what we're doing, we're not playing football or whatever. You don't want a compression fit because it's going to, even your capillaries are going to be compressed and it's going to cut down on blood flow in general. But you want a form fit. Like you want as much surface contact between your body and the base layer, because it's going to be the easiest and most efficient movement of moisture. And then all the other layers, I would say, for a couple reasons, you don't want them baggy. You don't want them tight. You want to have freedom of movement. But as the more dead air that you have, in some regard, it's insulated, but I'd rather have the dead air trapped in the lofted garment, like my puffy jacket, but not have a lot of dead air between those layers, because that's where the moisture gets lost and it's harder to push it through, right? Also, if you have a lot of extra material, it weighs more, it takes up more space. And then third, with bow hunters, and specifically, you don't want a lot of material swooshing between your feet, making noise. And you don't want a big baggy forearm or bicep when you're trying to draw your bow for bowstring clearance. So,
Sure.
I would say, I don't know, people use different terms. I like to say most of our stuff is a standard fit. There's a couple things I call expedition fit, which means they're definitely cut oversized, like some of our bigger puffy jackets, because I want them to go over everything. Hopefully you're never shooting a bow wearing that jacket. But generally speaking, I would say we have either a performance fit or a standard fit. And again, that's where our designers and developers, really try to do a good job, and wear garments that stretch help with that. So yeah, you don't want a lot of extra material flapping around. It's going to make noise. It's going to get in the way of your bowstring. It's going to swoosh between your feet. And those are all important things when you're a bow hunter.
Yeah. Man, I appreciate your time, and this is awesome. A high-tech redneck geeking out on clothes. Who'd have thunk it?
Oh, I'd have never thought it about myself, dude. My brother gives me a hard time. He's like, "Hey, so how's the fashion industry?" You know,
That's a
and
good
I'm
one.
like, "Yeah, I guess I deserve that, you know." But yeah.
You-
Well, I knew it wouldn't be a short one. I appreciate you putting up with my long answers,
oh
but
no,
I
it's good
just feel
stuff.
it's important to get the information out. But if it does well and you want to circle back and have another one, I'm certainly into that. So.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about elk. Elk season.
No, we didn't talk about any of that, did we?
We should at least have a beer and sometime and make a plan to do that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan to get a plan going for
Yeah.
sure.
We'll end this here, but I wanted to just talk to you for a second. So cool, man. I appreciate your time. It's good talking to you, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. I
You,
appreciate you having me on.
you bet.